What if we told you that once a year, the veil between dimensions doesn't just thin, it is torn asunder, spewing forth unspeakable horrors from the darkest dimensions into our world? This is no mere myth or forgotten tale. This is a blood-curdling, bone-chilling reality. One that awaits those brave enough to face Halloween Horror Nights. The one event where your darkest fears crawl out of the shadowy corners of the multiverse to feast upon your fear. Ladies and gentlemen, ghouls and goblins, I'll be your pilot today for this Lore Tour's flight through the realms of dread and terror to examine the lore behind Universal's Halloween Horror Nights. So grab your talismans from the overhead locker and clutch your garlic close. For on today's trip, we'll be coming face to face with the icons of terror that come crawling out of their crypts every Halloween to prey on innocent mortals just like you. Please keep your seatbelt fastened at all times and prepare yourselves. You're in for a treat, or should I say, a trick. Welcome aboard this lore tour of Halloween Horror Nights. Fear, it's the primal response to a perceived threat, an instinct hardwired into us from a time when shadows could hold creatures far more dangerous than ourselves. In the modern world, it's something that we experience mostly in thrills, like those found every Halloween season at Universal Studios parks around the globe. But long ago, before city lights could chase away the dark, fear was an omnipresent force, looming just beyond the reach of the campfire. Many believed fear itself took physical form, stalking through the night, influencing the lives of mere mortals. The Greeks had their own gods of fear, Phobos and Deimos, beings who embodied dread and terror. But among the ancient scrolls of Babylonian priests, there is mention of an entity far older, far darker, a being who embodies fear itself. His name is Adaru. The ancient Sumerians spoke of Adaru as the demon of fear, a being who thrives on the terror of his mortal playthings. According to legend, he is fear's physical manifestation, lurking in shadows, manipulating events, and harvesting souls to grow his strength. Fortunately though for humanity, Adaru was sealed away millennia ago, trapped in an ancient object, an old unassuming lantern. From within this prison, he has been forced to watch the world he longs to torment, whispering fear into the minds of mortals in subtle, more hidden ways. According to the Sumerian scrolls, Adaru's power grows in cycles, foretold to reach its peak every 5,000 years. And now, as his strength rises, from his lantern, which has conveniently made its way into Universal Studios' prop department, Adaru begins to send forth his demonic minions, spreading fear and claiming souls to feed his dark purpose. Each act of terror, each soul claimed, prepares the way for Adaru's return and the hell he intends to bring with him. But is his return inevitable? Let's uncover the dark past that has brought us here. In the early 90s, from his lantern hidden away in some Universal warehouse, Adaru's latest attempts to infiltrate our world were just beginning. But his influence was weak. He was forced to employ subtler techniques to spread fear among the patrons of Universal parks. His first attempt to manipulate the living came not through grand icons or monstrous masterminds, but by possessing unsuspecting park workers, using them as vessels to summon lesser monsters, villains, and creatures designed to harvest the fear of guests. The first to answer Adaru's call was the mischievous trickster ghost Beetlejuice in 1991, a lesser villain in the grand scheme of things, but a force of chaos nonetheless. He was summoned to stir the early fears of the masses. Beetlejuice toyed with guests, laying the groundwork for the terror to come. But he wasn't enough. Adaru needed more. He reached out into the dark past of Universal itself, pulling forth the monsters who once stalked the silver screen. Creatures like Dracula, the Wolfman, and Frankenstein's monster roamed the streets of Universal, their timeless horrors reigniting the fear that once captivated audiences. By 1995, 5 years into his manipulations of fear at Universal, Adaru's influence had grown and his grasp of the parks tightened. With it came the Crypt Keeper. Born of 2 carnival sideshow performers, the Crypt Keeper was a macabre storyteller, one who resided in his gothic mansion where he would tell scary stories to guests. Adaru chose him to helm one of the early horror nights as master of ceremonies, and he reveled in grotesque horror, ensuring that fear festered in every corner of the park. And finally, as the decade closed and Adaru's strength reached new heights, the demon summoned Imhotep, the ancient undead Egyptian sorcerer. Having obtained the sarcophagus of Imhotep and moving it to the park, Adaru resurrected the mummified fellow from his millennia-long slumber and chose him to take over the 9th annual Halloween Horror Nights. Imhotep himself resided in and would transport guests into his Egyptian homeworld, where he awoke his mummified priests and performed live mummifications on those who ventured into Hamunaptra. But these early manifestations were only the beginning. Adaru was biding his time, growing stronger, feeding off every scream and heartbeat of fear. By the end of the 90s, he no longer needed to possess workers or rely on these lesser monsters. He was ready to introduce his true agents of fear, the Icons, his heralds. Beings crafted from the very fabric of terror itself, and thus the true reign of Adaru would soon begin. The first and perhaps most infamous of Adaru's heralds was a twisted jester of nightmares, Jack the Clown. Born in the late 1800s in that oh-so-creepy of locales, the Shady Brook Sanitarium, Jack would eventually run away from his abusive family to join the circus, finding his new home in the Carnival of Frills, a traveling freak show run by the charismatic but darkly sinister sorcerer Dr. Oddfellow. At first, Jack charmed audiences with his playful tricks. He became the children's favorite clown, delighting them with pranks and antics. But behind that painted smile lay a dark secret, a trail of missing children that followed the carnival's every move. Wherever the Carnival of Frills traveled, young ones began disappearing. By Halloween night in 1939, the authorities were closing in on the Carnival of Frills, zeroing in on Jack, the so-called jester of juvenile slaughter. Dr. Oddfellow, fearing that the investigation would expose his own blood-stained hands, took matters unto himself. In a scuffle under the moonlight, Oddfellow struck Jack down, but as their blood mingled in the fight, Jack absorbed a part of Oddfellow's twisted immortal essence, a dark power that refused to let Jack simply die. But with Jack incapacitated and seemingly slain, Oddfellow hid his body inside a gruesome jack-in-the-box stashed alongside his victim's remains in the carnival's House of Horrors. It was during this time that Adaru, the Sumerian demon of fear, took notice of Jack's murderous potential, reaching across the veil to make the clown his first herald. Decades passed and Jack's hibernation continued, undisturbed until a fateful day in the 1980s. A BBC film crew on a quest to document America's great dark rides stumbled upon the forgotten House of Horrors. Inside, they found Jack's box and the remains of his victims. It would be their last discovery, as each crew member soon met a grisly end. The House of Horrors and Jack's Jack-in-the-Box would eventually make their way to Universal Studios, where they were stored as Halloween props, but all it took was one curious worker to wind the gear on Jack's box, and the killer clown returned from his slumber. This time he was free to unleash havoc at Halloween Horror Nights, the ideal playground for Adaru's murderous herald. Once the event had come to a close, Jack would not stay quiet for long. In 2001, he returned to Halloween Horror Nights, spreading his twisted brand of chaos and dragging his brother Eddie out of the shadows with him. You see, when Jack ran off to the circus, Eddie was left alone, facing a life of neglect and abuse. To cope, he created his own haunted house in the trailer park he lived in. It was his only place of escape and fun, but his haunted refuge would soon turn into a nightmare when local teens set it ablaze, trapping Eddie inside and leaving him scarred, both physically and mentally. That night, something dark awakened within him, a thirst for vengeance. Now with his brother back at his side, Eddie turned his fury against the world, making the guests of Halloween Horror Nights the unwilling contestants of his brutal game show, and prey for his chainsaw-wielding murder-for-hire henchmen. In 2002, Halloween Horror Nights brought forth a new nightmare, the Caretaker, formerly known as Dr. Albert Kane. Once a respected surgeon and caretaker of Shady Oak Cemetery in Willamette Valley, Kane harbored a morbid curiosity about the nature of life, death, and the soul itself. Obsessed with discovering what happened to those he couldn't save, he began conducting grotesque experiments on both the dead and the living, with his family and deranged assistants as accomplices. The Kane family dug up bodies from the cemetery, using them as specimens, decorations, and even for twisted parties. The doctor's mansion, once a grand Victorian home, was converted into a funeral parlor, a front for his gruesome lab. Rumors spread quickly, and horrified townsfolk stormed the mansion with torches, setting it ablaze and trapping the Kane family inside. But Albert Kane was no ordinary man. He escaped through tunnels beneath the cemetery, aided by Adaru, who had chosen Kane as his next herald. The caretaker oversaw the year's events like a macabre curator of a living museum of horror. The haunted houses became death traps where guests unknowingly walked into his experiments. In 2003, Halloween Horror Nights took a chilling cinematic turn under the direction of Paolo Rovinski, an Eastern European filmmaker with a past as dark as his films. Hired by Universal as an up-and-coming director, Rovinski was tasked with bringing new horror to the park, but Universal didn't know the truth. Rovinski was on the run after his disturbing secret had come to light. His provocative films back home were in fact real snuff films, movies where actors met their deaths on camera. This depravity had drawn Adaru's attention, and he was chosen as the next Herald of Fear. Given control over the year's festivities, Rovinski, now known as the director, turned Halloween Horror Nights into a horrifying film set. Haunted houses became his personal sound stages, each transformed into a real-life horror set. Here, guests were no longer just visitors. They became the director's unwilling stars, forced into scenes of terror and despair, with each scream captured as part of his vision. In 2005, the event was graced and cursed by the storyteller, Elsa Strict. Her kindly, grandmotherly appearance served as a mask for the monstrous darkness within. You see, as a child, Elsa had been visited by a winged creature intent on skinning her alive, but in an act of terrifying defiance, she turned on the monster and consumed it. By devouring the creature, Elsa inherited its darkness, gaining the power to transport others into her dark tales. This eldritch power caught Adaru's eye, and he claimed her as his fourth herald. With control of Halloween Horror Nights, Elsa brought guests into her newest story, Terra Cruentus, a horrifying realm ruled by the demonic Terror Queen, a monarch who demanded sacrifices of blood from those brave or foolish enough to enter her domain. By 2006, Adaru had grown powerful enough from the annual harvest of fear to summon all of his heralds back to the park at once. Jack, the caretaker, the director, and the storyteller were all dragged to Halloween Horror Nights. Each of them was given control over their own haunted house, where they would terrorize and torment parkgoers. The director cast guests in scenes from his favorite killer flicks. The caretaker was resurrected, bringing visitors into his home to witness a ritual to resurrect his daughter. The storyteller would refurbish an old, scary roadside attraction, where she and her murderous redneck family would slaughter guests. While Jack, well, after his previous exploits at the park, he was arrested and committed to the Shady Brook Sanitarium, the very place he was born. This cage couldn't hold Jack though, and while on a visit to Shady Brook, park-goers stumbled upon a mass prisoner riot led by the psychotic clown. In 2007, Jack the Clown returned with a vengeance in his twisted creation, the Carnival of Carnage. Having escaped the asylum, Jack tracked down Dr. Oddfellow, his former boss and the man who had betrayed him years ago. Upon finding the sorcerer, Jack killed him and seized his magical cane of souls. Empowered and inspired, Jack crowned himself ringmaster, intent on assembling the most horrific carnival acts imaginable. In his travels, Jack recruited an array of sadistic supporting acts. Freddy Krueger, the dream-stalking killer who tormented guests with nightmares they couldn't wake from, thanks to a new sleep-inducing formula. Mary Shaw, a vengeful ventriloquist ghost who lurked in a decrepit theatre. An alien thing from a remote Arctic outpost preyed upon those who wandered into its secret facility. Jason Voorhees, the towering serial killer, hunted anyone bold enough to enter the newly constructed Camp Packanack, and Leatherface, who butchered trespassers in his family home. Jack's chaotic carnival of carnage fueled Adaru's power with fear, but the clown's chaotic nature was also a double-edged sword. His reckless reign of terror may have weakened Adaru's control over Halloween Horror Nights, setting the stage for the following year when another dark power would rise and wrest control from Adaru's grasp. In 2008, Halloween Horror Nights fell under the control of Bloody Mary, a figure who wielded fear in a way that even Adaru had not foreseen. Unlike Adaru's previous creations, Bloody Mary, originally known as Dr. Mary Agana, was not bound to the Sumerian demon of fear. Instead, she drew her power from a legacy of urban legends. Her story began with the mysterious disappearance of her grandmother, Mary Worthington, in 1908, and continued as Dr. Agana opened her facility, named Living Fearlessly, in the 1950s, where she conducted disturbing experiments on her patients' fears. Her descent into the supernatural came as she began seeing creatures lurking within mirrors, entities that ultimately possessed her and transformed her into the terrifying legend known as Bloody Mary. Taking over the Horror Nights, Bloody Mary invited the guests to enter the Mirror, a portal to a horrifying realm where urban legends, nightmares, and myths took on a deadly form. She was also not alone in her reign of terror. To strengthen her grip, Mary assembled a council of iconic figures. The evil queen who once tormented Snow White, the Wicked Witch of the West, Lizzie Borden, Sam Hain, and the Eerie Gentleman. But Adaru was never truly gone. Lurking in the shadows, he waited, regaining strength until by 2009, his influence stirred once more. A new herald was on the horizon, the Usher, a figure tasked with leading guests back into Adaru's world of fear. Julian Browning, the Usher, had once been an attendant at the Universal Palace Theatre, a beloved movie house converted from a 1920s playhouse. As a die-hard horror fan and a strict rule enforcer, Browning despised anyone who disrupted the movie experience, but his passion ultimately led to his untimely death in 1940. During a re-release of his favourite horror film, The Phantom of the Opera, a scuffle occurred between Browning and a rude patron, one that ended with Browning heading backstage where he became entangled in the ropes of an old sandbag, leading to him dying a slow, torturous death just inches above the floor. In the years following Browning's death, the Universal Palace Theatre became notorious for strange incidents. Rude patrons faced bizarre and gruesome fates. Some whispered these to be punishments from Browning's vengeful spirit. Adaru saw potential in the Usher's chilling past and strict sense of justice, choosing him as his newest herald. Under Adaru's influence, the Usher was resurrected, with one dark goal: to transform Halloween Horror Nights into his own eerie theatre, where guests were preyed upon by movie monsters. By 2010, the time had come. Adaru's lantern, hidden for decades in the Universal Prop Department, began to show signs of activity, cold spots that chilled even the bravest, strange noises that echoed through the empty hallways, and lights that flickered with no explanation. These were all signs of Adaru's return. Because, thanks to the actions of his heralds, Adaru finally gained enough power to physically manifest in the park, bringing with him his demonic heralds, each representing a different facet of fear. Jack the Clown served as the Herald of Chaos. The Caretaker was the Herald of Death. The director was appointed Herald of Sacrifice, the storyteller was Herald of Mythos, while the usher was the Herald of Vengeance, and Daru let loose these heralds, each one commanding their own domain of fear, all working together to create an event of pure, unrelenting terror. The screams of the guests only served to feed Daru's power, as he claimed souls for his eternal reign. This eternal reign would not prove eternal, however. As with all things, the power of fear is fleeting. Come November 1st, the light on Daru's lantern went out, forcing the demon and his heralds to retreat to the lantern. With Daru's physical form once again sealed away, his influence became subtler, more corrupting and manipulating, but not directly controlling. In 2011, a new entity took the stage, Lady Luck, an ancient succubus who thrived on the thrill of deadly gambles. She inspired worship amongst the ancient Greeks and Romans, who called her Tyche or Fortuna. Those who gamble with Lady Luck and lose will be killed by her and turned into one of her minions. But if you win one of her gambles, well, she'll hunt you to the ends of the earth till you take an extra gamble. And during the event, Lady Luck transformed Halloween Horror Nights into a game of chance, manifesting herself in some form in all the haunted houses, where the guests were forced to choose their fates, with Lady Luck ensuring that every choice led to a horrific end. For the rest of the early 2010s, Daru's influence waned as he was in his lantern. Without a central icon to control the chaos, Halloween Horror Nights became a battleground of horrors. Hordes of walkers roamed freely, stalking the park and feasting on the flesh of guests. Rival groups emerged, adding to the mayhem. Vampiric factions prowled, barbaric warriors clashed, and chainsaw-wielding prison gangs ran rampant. But by 2015, one of Daru's heralds, his most chaotic creation, would rebel. Jack the Clown, ever the wildcard, defied his master, choosing to forge his own path of destruction. As Bloody Mary, seeking to ignite the chaos, did the unthinkable. She released Jack and some of the other icons from Daru's lantern. With this newfound freedom, Jack brought back his infamous Carnival of Carnage. With this deadly spectacle and new era of terror, Jack was back. This time the stakes were higher. Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees were brought back, but pitted against each other in a brutal battle for dominance, while Jack's longtime companion, Chance, also stepped into the spotlight. She was Jack's demented assistant, who had been by his side for years, a psychotic harlequin with a love for chaos and madness. She embodied the unpredictable, destructive nature of Jack's Carnival of Carnage. Together they unleashed terror on the park, bringing new chaotic life to the Horror Nights. But with all things Halloween Horror Nights, Jack's reign of terror didn't really last past the end of October, as upon the event's conclusion he was arrested and locked away in his box once more, while his companion Chance was sent to an asylum, where the following year the horrors of her mind became all too real. You see, inside the asylum, Chance's psychosis only grew stronger. The terrifying visions and nightmares she imagined were so powerful that they manifested in reality. The park became a frightful playground for the horrors she envisioned, as her mind was unleashed upon the unsuspecting guests. Sometime later, by 2021, Daru and his heralds returned once again, though it was revealed that through some unknown events, they had all been reunited, trapped together once more in Daru's lantern. Unable to escape their prison, the demon and his heralds invited guests to step into the lantern, which it turns out is actually a portal, one that's controlled by Daru and leads to another hellish dimension below the Universal Park. In 2022, a new force emerged, as the Horror Nights were overrun by the Pumpkin Lord, a creature that personifies Halloween itself, growing stronger each year by drawing on the essence of the season. Born from a mass of malignant vines and pumpkins, the Pumpkin Lord gains power by enticing people to celebrate Halloween, harvesting strength from their seasonal traditions. With each passing year he grows larger and more imposing, until the entire park is in his grasp. To help him cultivate the spirit of Halloween, the Pumpkin Lord commands a host of minions, witches, goblins, and eerie creatures lurking in the shadows. Leading his followers is Grommelkin the Summoner, who who conjures up the power of Halloween and reveres the Pumpkin Lord's tendrilled form, and park-goers actually embraced his dark presence during Halloween Horror Nights 30, even joining Gromolkin in his rituals to honour the Pumpkin Lord. The oversized hellish Gord's influence spread throughout every haunted corner of the park, as his vines crept around the event, forming the haunted houses guests would visit. In 2023, Dr. Oddfellow returned as the mastermind behind Halloween Horror Nights 32, bringing with him a dark history steeped in horror and mystery. Once a mortal obsessed with the powers of the Zodiac, Oddfellow sought immortality through rituals that twisted and mutilated his followers into monstrous forms, representing the Zodiac signs. His journey took him through doomed jungles and the dark realm of the Zodiac, where he would gain immortality and wield a powerful crystal skull, the same skull that would later adorn his notorious Cane of Souls, allowing him to corrupt anything he touched. Oddfellow's reign of terror spanned decades. In this time he infiltrated vampire councils, launched brutal massacres, and gained more powers. So when he was murdered by Jack the Clown in 2007, Oddfellow was not really killed. He was instead cast into a dark dimension, only to return in 2023, driven by powers harvested from his dark deeds. Reclaiming his cane, he offered immortality to new followers, drawing masses of devoted souls under his control. Each masochistic act and the monsters Oddfellow unleashed on the park that year might actually have been a tribute to the very entity he served, that entity being none other than, well, who else could it be? Adaru. In 2024, Halloween Horror Nights was greeted by a fresh, new terror, as the accumulated screams of Halloween Horror Nights guests collected over the past 33 years had finally reached a critical mass. Deep beneath the Universal Park, their cries of terror coalesced, forming a festering overgrowth of terror that sprouted from beneath the park. This primeval force finally tore a rift between our world and a universe where pure horror dwells. Through this gateway lay two distinct realms, one a domain of visceral torment, ruled by Sinister, an embodiment of brutal physical horror. The other is a bizarre nightmare, overseen by Surreal, an entity of psychological dread and warped reality. Upon entering Halloween Horror Nights, each guest must choose their path, confront the blood-curdling horrors of Sinister, or to navigate the mind-warping terrors of Surreal. As the scares of Halloween Horror Nights grow more terrifying each year, one thing becomes clear: fear itself has become the very fabric of the park. From the frighteningly simple spooks of early years, to Jack, Adaru and the Heralds running amok, each icon, each scare has been a piece of a darker puzzle, feeding the relentless hunger for fear and scares, a hunger belonging both to Adaru and to you thrill-seekers who each year venture to the home of horror. What does the future hold for this cursed event? Which terrors are lurking, ready to pounce on us mere mortals in future Horror Nights? We'll just have to wait and see. But until then, we'd like to thank you for choosing to fly with Lore Tours today. Make sure to let us know down in the comments which monster or villain you'd like to see stalking Universal Parks in the future. And if you enjoyed this trip, make sure to subscribe to become one of our frequent flyers. We can't wait to have you on board with us again soon. Thanks for watching, catch you next time.